This episode contains subject matter around actual wartime events that some audience members may find disturbing. Listener discretion advised.
Militarily Speaking, episode 58, Rocky Sickmann.
This episode, we talk with Rocky Sickmann, Senior Vice President of the Anheuser-Busch account at Folds of Honor.
Welcome to Militarily Speaking, brought to you by Armed Forces Bank. This is Tom McLean, and I have next to me, I'm blessed to have her next to me, is Jodi Vickery.
You must need something.
I know. I need a report from you later on something. I am the Regional Military Executive for Armed Forces Bank, and Jodi is the Executive Vice President. I'm going to call you by the right title, Director of Consumer Banking.
Well played. Well played.
That's pretty good for an ad lib.
Jack of all trades will work for food.
Jodi keeps changing her job title because she's a yes woman, Rocky. So every time someone comes to her and says...
that's got a bad connotation.
It does?
You don't be like a yes man.
Well, but some people are yes men.
Not this one.
But you do it with such grace and style, though. You just say, oh, please pick me. I'd love to be on this committee. I'd love to do this project.
Not committees. So we digress. We made it all the way to the intro, Rocky, before he went off on some weird tangent. So apologies in advance for all that's to come. Again, welcome to our show. We're excited to have you listening and learning about our guest, Rocky Sickmann with Folds of Honor. I do, Rocky, want to share a little bit with our audience about your background, your profile. We'll do that, and then we'll dive in and hear it in your words, because I think that will be a whole lot more compelling. But I do want to give them an overview. It's a pretty good,
if you can't get through this bio on Rocky, I'll help you out.
I know.
Because it's very thorough, extensive, and it's pretty admirable.
It definitely is. So we didn't want to shortchange that. So all known information to you, but not to our audience. So Rodney Rocky Sickmann graduated from Washington High School in 1976 and immediately entered the U.S. Marine Corps. In 1979, just 28 days into his tour of duty at the American Embassy in Tehran, Iran, Sickmann became a player in one of the most terrifying events in U.S. history. On November 4th, 1979, after months of turmoil marked by the return of the exiled Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, I hope I got that right, the American Embassy in Tehran was overrun by militants and its employees taken captive. Sergeant Rocky Sickmann, then just 22 years old, was one of 65 Americans taken hostage. Sickmann remained a hostage for 444 days before being released on January 20th, 1981, following 14 months of diplomacy by President Jimmy Carter. 3 months later, Sickmann was honorably discharged after 6 years in the Marine Corps and received several accolades during his service, including the Prisoner of War Medal, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Award of Valor, and Good Conduct Medal. Following the military, he began working in advertising for KMOX Radio in St. Louis, Missouri, and then entered the private sector for Anheuser-Busch InBev. He spent the next 34 years with the company, most recently as the U.S. National Director for Military and Industry Affairs until his retirement in July 2016. That's why you look so happy you're retired. Sickmann, not really, though, because we're going to go on to tell you everything he's been up to since.
Yeah.
Sickmann's personal diary, Iranian Hostage, a personal diary of 444 days in captivity, is also the only known diary to have been smuggled out of Iran and published. The diary is no longer in publication. As the U.S. National Director for Military and Industry Affairs at Anheuser-Busch InBev, Sickmann oversaw all military special events, military and industry trade media publications, and national industry trade shows. Throughout his career at Anheuser-Busch, Sickmann also played a key role in increasing Anheuser-Busch's market penetration among the military by training wholesalers, coordinating marketing and publicity, executing national sales promotions, and planning special military events. He helped coordinate the Here's to the Heroes tour, which salutes the men and women of the armed forces, allowing Americans to show their support for the troops via recorded messages filmed on location at community events, celebrations, and festivals nationwide, and shared with U.S. troops serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Personally and professionally, Sickmann has been fortunate to share his story on many different platforms. You're going to be jealous of all this, Tom.
I know. Well,
including
Rocky's my connection to celebrities.
You
right?
think.
Yeah.
Including ABC News, ESPN, Fox and Friends, Fox News, Los Angeles Times, MSNBC, NFL Timeline series, the New York Times, to the cast of the Oscar-winning film Argo, starring Ben Affleck.
So, by the way,
you know he's going to talk to you about Ben Affleck.
Didn't you do a cameo?
No. I mean, that's a whole nother story. You guys, we could be here all day telling stories.
Yeah.
And I can
We'll get that.
About Argo, how it came about.
Okay.
Yes, Tom thinks he's like 1 degree of separation from most celebrities.
From Kevin Bacon.
From most any celebrity on the planet. Also involved in national and local veteran and military organizations and educational institutions really around the country. In August 2016, Sickmann's military and professional experience, coupled with his passion for our armed forces, led him to pursue an opportunity with his favorite nonprofit organization, Folds of Honor. In this new role, Sickmann helps advance the Folds mission to stand in the financial gap of the more than 1 million dependents adversely affected by war, providing educational scholarships to the children and spouses of those killed or disabled while serving our nation. Sickmann and his wife of 40 years, Jill, have 3 children, Hannah, Chelsea, and Spencer, and grandchildren to go with. So happy guy, doing a lot of good stuff. So welcome. It is truly an honor to have you on our show today. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jodi. It's very kind. You didn't have to read all that down.
Well, I know none of it is like a surprise to you because you've lived it, but it's just, I think, great to give our audience that context before we dive in. And heaven forbid, Tom and I forget to ask something really important along the way. But
back to Argo.
Yeah.
So it was like this, the Canadians something or other, right? You know more about the story than on Wikipedia or online, but maybe we'll get into that, Rocky, during this conversation. But yeah, I'm sure there's a connection there that we can wind into our conversation. So we'll look forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So really, honestly, where to begin? Maybe tell us, just because we're going to get into other details, but tell us about your military history at a high level. And even more recently, how'd you spend Memorial Day weekend?
Yeah, well, my military history started really growing up in a small town of Krakow, Missouri, a population of 50, I always say, and that's dogs and cats included. My parents, 2 parents, and there were 5 kids in the family. But my parents always taught us the love of family, love of our Catholic faith, and love of country. And little did I realize that those things would help me through the darkest times. And my parents were very patriotic. My father served, my brother served in Vietnam, during Vietnam. And so every time there was a parade, I was carrying an American flag, or else I was raising a flag at the Catholic grade school there at Washington, or in Krakow, and then Washington High School. And so it was 1975, and the Vietnam War was just really coming to an end. And all the Vietnam veterans were coming back. And I was not the studious person in high school. I was very athletic. I was captain my senior year of football team. And I did not have my head put on straight. And so, and not to waste my parents' money, which they really didn't have a lot of money, I said, you know what, I'm going to go into the service. And I knew that there was more outside this small town of Krakow, Missouri. And so I joined the Marine Corps, and the world I wanted to see and the world I saw. I graduated in San Diego in 1976, then was deployed to Asia for the next year, came back, and then was assigned to Camp Geiger, North Carolina. I was 3-4 in Asia, 2-8 in Camp Geiger. I was then deployed over to Europe for another year, came back, and I always wanted to be a Marine security guard, which is a very elite duty. There's over 200 American embassies around the world, and the inside perimeter is guarded by United States Marines. The outside perimeter is guarded by the host government. So I said, eventually after I get to see the world, I'm going to join this duty. Well, it just so happened that on the way back from Europe, I am on a helicopter carrier, and it takes like 15 days to get across the Atlantic.
Wow.
And my sister, she hooks me up with this blind date of this girl in Washington, Missouri, which I knew her brothers, but I never knew that this young girl exists. So I came home, my sister fixed me up on a blind date. I went, knocked on a door that night, and the door opens, and here's this beautiful woman. And I said, you went to Washington High School? Well, she was a freshman. I was a senior, and I knew her brothers, but Jill was like the smallest girl in high school, and she blossomed the next 3 years. And all of a sudden, we connected, but I told her, I said, hey, I got this last gig I'm going to be doing in the Marine Corps. It's a 3-year duty, and being on this duty, I cannot be married. I had to sign a document stating I would not be married for the term of 3 years.
That's interesting.
And so, but still yet, we were friends. She was just graduating from high school. We were so young. I was so young, stupid. Raging hormones. I had the world in my hands, and she was going to college. And they say, hey, we'll connect in December. I'll fly you over to Germany and we'll go skiing over in Germany. Well, obviously, November 4th occurs and the rest is history. And so, and I think obviously those days prior to November 4th, Jodi and Tom, the American embassy, there had been 20,000 Americans in the country of Iran. And Iran, back in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, a beautiful country. I mean, it was very westernized. The Shah was there trying to build a westernized peace. And all of a sudden, the Shah fled on a 747 with all of their belongings, January of 1979. These 20,000 Americans became at risk. And so the United States sent over all these 747s, told everybody, you have one suitcase you are allowed to bring, get on the airplane, you're getting out. So that's January of 1979. I get over there October 7th of 1979, and there's 66 Americans. And that's the people that are working at the American embassy. And so we had heard rumor that the Shah of Iran was going to be allowed into the United States for medical treatment. And you have to understand, this was the first year that the Islamic Republic of Iran, the mullahs, which again, they are thugs, the mullahs are thugs, and the Revolutionary Guard are terrorists. And that is the first year that they formed their new government. And so when they heard that the Shah was going to be allowed into the United States, and let me back up, it was presented to President Carter at the point in time in his office that President Carter, we have to bring the Shah of Iran in. And it documented that President Carter said, if I bring the Shah in to the United States, what are you going to say if the Islamic Republic of Iran takes our people hostage?
Oh, wow.
And little did he realize, 2 weeks later, that's exactly what happened. And so that morning, Tom, I understand you're a movie guy. You like movies.
Kind of. Yeah.
That's an understatement, Rocky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that morning of November 4th, I can tell you the start of Argo, how that chanting was happening. I had just gotten off duty. I was doing the 11. So that morning, I had gone back to my apartment. I cleaned up, and we were getting ready for the Marine Corps birthday, which is November 10th. And I don't know how many listeners that you have are Marines out there, but Semper Fi Marines. But that morning, I had just had breakfast with about 5 people, another Marine, myself, and 3 of those individuals that worked the visa building, which just so happened to escape, that were in the movie Argo. But here we are, you guys, as we're sitting there talking, little did we realize that 4 hours later, our life would turn upside down and it would never be the same. So our compound was a 23-acre compound. The chancery was at the very front of the compound. The visa building was on the backside, where very near where we had breakfast that morning on the compound. So we were all excited that the Marine Corps birthday was coming up, and we're going to be having all these dignitaries from other embassies coming in for the party. They left to go to work. I walked down to the chancery, the main embassy building, walked in. Billy Gallegos was on guard duty along with another Marine. And I told Billy, I said, hey, I got to go run out in town, do some errands, and I'll be back and we'll have lunch. So obviously I walked out of the main embassy. And as I'm walking out of the embassy towards the motor pool, you could hear the demonstrations. And there had been demonstrations for the past 2 weeks, demonstrating. And the day before, on November 3rd, all non-essential people were sent to another safe house north, because we had heard that there was going to be a huge demonstration and we didn't know what was going to happen. And that day, there was probably over, I'd say, 100,000 people that were out in front of the American embassy chanting "Death to America." And so, and I mean, as a young, naive kid, I'm sitting there thinking, nothing's going to happen to me. I mean, my gosh, this is this movie stuff that you hear. And I'm on the phone, I can remember, and somebody saying, hey, what is that noise in the background? I said, oh, they're just demonstrating. You know, they want the Shah to come back and stand trial. That day of November 3rd, the military basically surrounded the compound, which showed that, hey, the Islamic Republic of Iran was there to protect this diplomatic post, which is the American embassy. Again, the inside is guarded by the Marines, but the outside is guarded by the host government. So that day they demonstrated that they were there to protect us. I'm walking down to the motor pool gate the morning of November 4th, and I will never forget, Jodi and Tom, as I'm walking into the motor pool gate, all of a sudden I heard the demonstration. My walkie-talkie had recall, recall. And there was a camera right over my head that looked right at the front gate. As I turned and looked at the front gate, I can tell you that, and when you watch that movie Argo, you'll look that there was no security at the front gate. It was like the security just basically filtered and went away. And here they all came over the gate. They're cutting the wires. I'm basically, back then I could run pretty fast. And I ran back to the chantry because we had no weapons. All of our weapons and all of our gear were inside the chantry. So I'm weaving through the hedges of the compound, and Billy, I can see him closing the steel door. He sees me long enough. And in fact, this morning, he and I, there's not a week that Billy and I don't
That's
talk
awesome.
to each other.
Yeah.
But that morning, he sees me running. He keeps the door open long enough for me to squeeze in. We close the door, put the steel bar down, and the embassy was completely secure. Nobody was getting in. Nobody was getting out. And that's the hard part, Jodi and Tom, is, many guys and girls tried to get there, but once you closed that door, you couldn't open it. And the movie Argo shows that we opened the door. That was not true. But anyway, what happened then is I went back and our weapons to secure an American embassy. This is 1979. I can tell you, I still speak to many American embassies, speak to the Marine Security Guard detachment in Quantico, but our weapons in 1979 consisted of a 38 snub nose and a sawed-off shotgun. That's what we had to secure an American embassy. I can tell you that American embassies are no longer ill-equipped as what we were.
That's good news. Yeah.
That morning, I can tell you, I'm sitting there, I'm loading my pistol. And if you guys have ever gone through a difficult time, a traumatic time in your life, you don't forget that. And each day being held hostage was that traumatic time. 444 days. But that first day of me putting my rounds, my adrenaline was pumping. These people are pounding on the door. They're chanting death to America. And I'm trying to add rounds to my pistol, and I'm dropping around, take a deep breath, put the round back in the chamber, close that, take my shotgun, I'm adding shells, and I'm sitting there thinking, at the age of 22, here I am standing off against the country of Iran against 60 Americans. And all of a sudden, they're pounding on the front steel door, and the plaster is starting to come off the wall from where they were banging on this door. And I radioed, 3 Marines came out of the 13 Marines. 7 Marines were in the American chantry that morning. So 3 Marines came. We had 2 Marines kneeling, 2 Marines standing, because at that point in time, deadly force was intact. They were attacking an American embassy, and if we got orders to fire, you would fire. But deadly force is the key. So here you are sitting there, and all of a sudden, through the walkie-talkie, you heard Billy, which is now down at the basement at another post. He radios and says they've gotten in. So I'm closest to the steps. I break away, run downstairs, don my gas mask, and all of a sudden, as I get downstairs, you're sitting there, and you can, again, to this day, I can remember my gas mask going from clear to fog, clear to fog. And your adrenaline is pumping. And Billy, he just points down the corridor, and down the corridor, you can see a bellow of smoke come from one of the offices. And all of a sudden, around the corner, the second thing I will never forget, other than the first of them coming over the wall, attacking an American embassy, and there was no security to protect us. The second thing is, around the corner come 4 Iranian women in black chadors. And behind them are the Islamic Republic of Iran men pushing them forward, knowing that we would not shoot these unarmed, innocent women. Upstairs, we're being screamed, don't fire, don't retaliate, help is on the way. So we get to the steps, tear gas is popped, because Billy and I have to go upstairs. They all turn around, leave the building. We get all of our stuff, post 1, we go up to the very top of the American embassy, and we're at the very top secured part of the chantry, and we barricade ourselves there. And our staff, State Department staff, are on the horn with President Carter. And it's now like 4 hours into this whole ordeal. And we have been calling for help. Ambassador Langdon, the charge d'affaires, he was at the foreign ministry. He was ready to ask for help. Nobody ever showed. If the military showed, they all broke rank and they all start running around the compound. I'll never forget that day, how chaotic it was. There was no security to help us, to free us. So finally, after 4 hours, they're now bringing people that they had taken outside earlier on that could not make it in the building. They were immediately taken. Their hands were tied to the back and they're blindfolded. They're bringing them up to the door and they're putting pistols to their head on the other side of the steel door on the top floor of the embassy. And they're saying, they got a gun to my head. If you don't open the door, they're going to shoot me. So at that point in time, we convey it, or not I, but State Department people that were on horn with President Carter. And President Carter said, it's going to take 18 hours before we get any help to you. Give yourself up and we'll get this resolved with diplomacy. Well, that was November 4th, 1979. And I hate to say it, guys, but diplomacy has never happened again with the Islamic Republic of Iran. What's really sad is, and we could be here all day and we don't have the time to do that. You guys have more important things to do. But the next 30 days during our interrogations, we were tied and not allowed to speak for 30 days. Out of the 444 days, we went outside 7 times out of 444 days. That first 30 days, through the interrogations, they would always sit there and tell us that you are being held hostage and you will not be released until the Shah comes back and stand trial. And I want to go back, Jodi and Tom, to these individuals, although my wife says I'm never going back there, but it's a beautiful country. And the Iranian people are wonderful people. The history of the country, the beauty of the country, but the mullahs and the Revolutionary Guard had just terrorized the place. But I want to go back and what they used to throw us up against the wall and mock firing squad, Russian roulette, criticizing us that we had the Shah. They think that they're doing better than what the Shah did. And there's no way. I mean, they have killed, they have put people in prison, they have tortured more people than probably what the Shah had done. So you really want to go back, and I think we all know the answer. The Iranian people, the good people, they don't like what's happening. They want freedom. And so, but yeah, we lived that course. And it was, like I said, that first 30 days was the most difficult because you were not allowed to speak to any of your other comrades. You were put into a corner of a room, and that's where you sat. And in that room, through the broken windows, Tom and Jodi, you would hear the city of Tehran, because the capital is where our American embassy was. And we were being held at the American embassy. In the morning, you would wake up and you would hear the city of Tehran start by the sound of all the honking, the cars and everything, and the chanting of death to America. And all of a sudden, it would become night and everybody would go to sleep. The next day, it would start. Day 2, day 5, day 50, day 100, day 200. And I mean, the world was going on without you. And you're sitting there thinking that 1975, when the Vietnam veterans came home, they were spit on. Nobody cared about them. And here I was being held and I'm thinking, I'm forgotten. But little did I realize I wasn't. So, I mean, you guys, I know you have some other questions, but I mean,
man, what a story, though.
Well, the story is, I mean, the story of why I'm really here, Tom and Jodi, is in 1980, April 25th, 8 individuals lost their life on an attempted rescue operation because President Carter had heard that the hanging judge was going to put us on trial. And President Carter did not want any of the hostages to be hung in the city square of Iran. And so President Carter did the most daring rescue operation. 2 C-130s started from Cairo, Egypt. 8 CH-53s started off the Nimitz, and they all met in the middle of the desert of Iran. They started on the night of April 24th. By the morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, they made it to the heart of Iran, and Iran didn't even know that they were there.
Wow.
And out of the 8 helicopters, they needed 6 helicopters to do the rescue operation. So President Carter sent 8 helicopters. Now, again, this is 1979. We did not have the best equipment and everything, equipment to analyze weather and all that stuff. not like what we have now. But anyway, 8 helicopters started. 2 hours into the flight, 2 of the helicopters had to abort and come back due to they hit a sandstorm. The last helicopter that landed in the desert, an Operation Eagle Claw, it lit up like a Christmas tree because of hydraulic problems. Mm. Colonel Beckworth, that was a commander on the ground, calls President Carter and says, "Sir, we've got 5 helicopters. We feel like we can still do the job." And President Carter said, "You told me that we needed 6. I said 8. And he said, "Yes, sir, but 2 had to abort due to mechanical. The last one that landed, hydraulic issues. We can't fly it. And we've got 5. We feel like we can do it." President Carter aborted the mission. And that's when the mission had been aborted. And the last CH-53 was refueling. And it was the first, Jodi and Tom, it was the first utilization of night vision goggles. And so here the pilot of the 53, he gets up because you're in sand. It's not like taxiing a helicopter on concrete. You can roll. You have to basically hop like a grasshopper. And so he gets up after just being refueled, and he lost his spotter in front of him, and the pilot becomes vertigo, which means that he doesn't know what's up, what's down, what's sideways, and he clips the wing of the C-130 and falls right onto the nose of the C-130. So Delta guys were on the back of this C-130 along with this fuel belly, which is a big rubber container that had fuel. I mean, they never refueled in midair in 1979. It wasn't until after all this had happened that they were able to do it. But the guys that were laying on this fuel belly, they all of a sudden saw this ball of fire come through the fuselage. They think they're under attack. They jump off the side of the C-130. Obviously, the helicopter, 3 Marines were killed, and five Air Force were killed because they couldn't get out. One of the guys that every year I have the opportunity to meet these guys that had the guts to try to come over to rescue us. And we get together, Billy and myself, because Billy, January of 1980, I told you that we were tied and kept to ourselves for like the first 30 some days. It wasn't until January that they put us into a room that, just like, think about the room that you guys are in right there, Jodi and Tom. Imagine having to be locked in that room for the next 400 days. If you have to go to the restroom, you knock on a door and you put a piece of paper underneath the door, because we were locked in offices of the American Embassy. And you would knock on a door and the guard would see your piece of paper alerting you that you'd have to go to the restroom. They would come, unlock the door, open the door, blindfold you, take you to the restroom, even though you knew where the restroom was. You did not leave that room until you were blindfolded, sometimes handcuffed, sometimes hands tied, taken to the bathroom, untied, unblindfolded, to the restroom, come back, knock on the door, guard would blindfold you, handcuff you, take you back to the office. Well, Billy and I were locked in a room for 400 days. And so, but we had no idea what had happened that night of April 25th. It wasn't until later that day that we could tell that people were running up and down the corridor of the area. We were up on a very top level of the American Chancery, and people were running up and down. You could hear vehicles in the back of the embassy driving erratically, and all of a sudden that night around 8 o'clock at night, they come barging into our room. And whenever that door opened, you jumped because you didn't know if they were going to come in and start shooting or what. Well, they came in that night, and little did we realize that they had found the charred bodies of those 8 servicemen. And they found the charred CH-53 and the charred CH-50 and the C-130. And so they knew that the United States was attempting to rescue us. And all the hostages were in the American Chancery compound that morning of April 25th. By that evening of April 25th, they came into our room. I was handcuffed. My left hand was handcuffed to Jerry Plotkin, another American that was locked with us. My hand was handcuffed to his right hand. My right hand was handcuffed to Billy's left hand. And they blindfolded us and handcuffed us. I didn't have glasses, didn't have hearing aids, all that stuff. And they took us from the room, handcuffed, blindfolded, downstairs into a vehicle, handcuffed Jerry to the left, handcuffed Billy to the right, and here you sat, blindfolded, handcuffed. They take a picture of you, and then they put a blanket over top of us. Little did we know that they did this because they were moving us. By that evening, they had moved all the hostages to other cities within the country of Iran, that the United States would never be able to find us. And so it wasn't until months later did we not only realize that we were held hostage, but now there's a war with Iran and Iraq that's occurring. The Iran-Iraq war starts around October of 1980, and they then bring us back to the American embassy. You guys, my kids, I have 3 wonderful children, and we had an old Dodge Caravan, and we had a main bench seat in the back, and we'd always have kids that would always say, I hate being in the middle. So I always have to tell them about how you'd be a bad hostage and how
with the left and the right. Yeah, you'd be bad.
It's perspective, kids.
For over 24 hours, you sat there and you didn't stop for a restroom. If you had to go to the restroom, you had to do it on yourself. I mean, being held hostage, it was the worst. And we heard these, we thought it was lightning. We thought it was thunder, but it was artillery. And so they had to move us one night because the artillery was hitting near us. And so they drove us back to Tehran, and they then put us in Evin prison, one of the most notorious Middle Eastern prisons. And then it wasn't until January of 1981 that here you were, 444 days you'd been held hostage. And they had taken our shoes from us back in March of 1980 so that you could never escape, you never could run. They gave you open-toed plastic sandaled shoes, which here in Soldiers Memorial in St. Louis, they have an exhibit. And that's when you know you're really old, is when your stuff is in the museum. But they have my shoes and everything.
Rocky, and I saw that they got some excerpts from the diary you kept that are on display in that museum, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
You correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding was you started with a typewriter, right? You had access to a typewriter?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. That was back in February of 1980, because we had already been through, after Thanksgiving, after Christmas, and after New Year's, you were hoping that there was going to be a humanitarian gesture, that we were going to be released. It wasn't until January, February, they kept coming in. You want to write a letter? We will give you the material to write a letter. So I said, okay, well, give me a typewriter. So sure enough.
Most of our audience doesn't know what a typewriter is, but keep going.
Especially the old typewriters that had the ribbons,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so they never could understand. Here I was typing, but I wasn't sending any letters. And so my diary, you guys, was really more another person that I was talking to. Billy and Jerry, you would sit there and talk to them, but there were things that you were just talking about, missing home, missing your mother making the pancakes and the batter on the grill, and missing Jill. And if I ever get out, I'm going to do this. So yes, I started with that. And then obviously they realized I wasn't typing in the letters to send out. They took the typewriter, and then I just basically start making printed on pieces of paper. So I want to say it's probably over 600 pages that I had collected.
So did it ever get confiscated from you while you're writing it to make sure that the content was legit and okay and nothing that was, I guess, attacking or?
No, absolutely. That's a great call, because interesting. The first time I took a shower, it was probably in 3 months after we were taken. And now every morning I wake up, I take a shower. You know why? I can't. No, I mean, the simple things that were taken from you. My finger was my toothbrush, and a bar of soap that you cleaned your body with was your toothpaste. And everybody used that same bar of soap. And so, but we would go and they would take us from the room, tie us together. And whenever they would say, hey, it's time to take a shower today, I always put like a small little piece of paper underneath my mat, because that's where I kept it. And so when I came back, that little piece of paper that was in the middle of the notes that I had been keeping, it was in the middle of the room. So I knew that they were reading my diary. And so my diary, it was not a political diary. It wasn't about the Islamic Republic of Iran or about Shah. It was more about my personal life and what was happening within me and talking about my family and Joe. So yes, they did read it, but it was never confiscated because it was never anything of value.
Yeah. We're probably going to go off script a little bit too,
Yeah.
right? But
I'm sure.
I just wonder, this probably isn't part of queuing up questions to you, Rocky, but how do you know what keeps you going, knowing that it was November 4th and 5th and 6th and
Well, how did you even know what time?
I know. And then your Thanksgiving, you say, well, I won't be at home for Thanksgiving. Then Christmas comes and yeah. So what goes on in your head while you're wondering, when's this going to end?
Yeah. And again, thank goodness I was so young, naive, stupid, but it was really my upbringing of my parents. As I told you, my parents teaching me the love of family, love of my Catholic church, and the love of our country. And during those first 30 days, they were trying to break you. They were trying to break you to make derogatory statements. And there was a time where one of the hostages basically made some derogatory statements and stated that the Shah needs to come back. Well, as a military person, you do not ever break your code of conduct. And so, I prayed. I prayed every morning, noon, and night, just hoping and praying that something would happen, and pray that if not today, and it wasn't until really January, February, when they finally put us into a room, we were no longer tied to a chair. I mean, at the very beginning, your arms were tied to the arms of the chair and your feet were tied to the feet of the chair. And that's how you sat for 30 days. At night, they put you on the floor and they tie your wrist to your ankles. And it wasn't until February, Billy and I being in the room, I mean, we were doing 600 sit-ups a day. And we were doing so many sit-ups, our back tailbone, it would bleed from being torn. But it was the only way, you guys, if you can imagine the frustration and the hatred that you wanted so bad. Every time you knocked on the door would open. You wanted to grab the individual and rip their cords out because you had so much hatred that you wanted out of this cage. And so you had to do something to take that frustration out. And so 600 sit-ups, 300 push-ups, walking back and forth. I mean, here I was, a young kid running 7 miles a day prior. And now all of a sudden I'm blocked and tied to a chair. I mean, I was never beaten by a rubber hose. I can tell you I was punched, smacked, threatened, mock firing squads, Russian roulette. But it was a psychological mind game every day for 444 days. You did not know if you were going to live or die each morning, noon, and night. And that was the hardest part. I mean, you heard gunshots and you're like thinking, what the heck is happening? And they kept you separated. So you didn't, I mean, I saw you in the morning of November 4th. I had breakfast with you.
Right.
I don't see you until all of a sudden we're released January 20th, 1981. They come into our room that night and said, it's time to leave. They blindfold us, right? And they didn't tie our hands. They didn't handcuff us. So that was different. So they put us, I was the first one out of the room that night. And instead of going right, the way we came into the room, we turned left, walked down the corridor, stopped, and all of a sudden opens up a door. And I felt this cold, fresh air. And I walked out into the snow and I'm feeling something I hadn't felt for 2 years, snow. And I'm walking, crunching through the snow, and the snow is running through my toes and my feet. And it feels so cold, but feels so good. And they put me onto a vehicle, turn me around and sit me down. And all of a sudden the vehicle starts off and it scrapes the right side of the vehicle, jumps a curb, turns right. And we go for about 30 minutes. And all of a sudden it turns right again. And you hear a sound of a jet engine. And you had prayed for this. You had cried for this. You would hope for this, another opportunity in life. And all of a sudden the vehicle stops and the force is pushing against the vehicle that we're in. And the guard says, I'm blindfolded. And so you start them blindfolded. Like I said, I didn't have glasses, didn't have hearing aids. And you start them blindfolded and you're seeing people that you hadn't seen for 444 days. You look bad, you smell bad, and you're looking really bad. And they start plucking one by one, and they take us to the back of the airplane, and you're walking up the gangplank. I hadn't seen a woman in 444 days. And here this little stewardess, she is sitting there, and she says, please, you must come very quickly. And I don't know if you guys know, the reason why we were let go is because the United States government released $8.3 billion in gold on January 17th. January 17th, 1981, two C-130s, along with this 727, which is a Algerian commercial aircraft, comes into Tehran. President Carter worked a deal out with the Islamic Republic of Iran by releasing frozen assets for the release of the hostages, because Iran, it just so happened, they needed these assets to buy weapons to fight the war in Iraq. So without the war in Iraq, I'd probably still be over there or in a hole somewhere. But that airplane came right behind, because with the money transaction, we were supposed to be released. But the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they told us this in our interrogations, it is not you, the American people, we hate. It's your government. But we will use you to humiliate your government. So what they wanted to do was stab President Carter one last time. And what was that? They were released on January 20th. We get onto the airplane, and all of a sudden they're closing the door, and you're looking around saying, well, wait, where's Kurt? Where's Gene? Where's Judy? Where's Debbie? Where's everybody else? And the stewardesses and the pilot had to tell us that, no, you're the last remaining 52. The others were let go a year earlier. We had no idea that others had been let go and that we were the last 52 people remaining, because you could not, nor did you leave anybody behind. It was unthoughtful. And I felt so bad knowing those that, obviously the 6 that were rescued by, the movie Tony Mendez, Argo, and then of course the others that were released. But imagine being those poor people being put on an airplane, knowing that their fellow colleagues are still being locked up. I mean, they had difficulty. And so finally it was, the pilot came on and says, hey, it's time to leave. Gets to the end of the runway. He turns left, pulls up a little bit further, turns left. He pulls up, he's got the foot on the brake, and he's revving the engines, and the engine's starting to rev up, and you're holding on to the armrest. Like, is this plane really going to take off? I mean, is there a heat-seeking missile? Is there a bomb on the plane? And all of a sudden, the pilot comes back down to an idle. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Another mind game. And the pilot comes on and says, they've turned the runway lights off. And you're like thinking, why would they turn on? Well, little do we realize, back home was the inauguration. They waited 20 minutes until President Carter was out of office and President Reagan was in office, just to stab President Carter. And you have to understand, what did the Islamic Republic of Iran do to President Reagan? They killed 240 Marines in Beirut, a suicide bomber. And so that's why I regret not ever pulling that trigger the morning of November 4th, 1979, where the war on terrorism started, you guys. And, 8 people, like I said, and now I work for this wonderful organization, Folds of Honor, that provides scholarships to children and spouses of fallen and disabled military and first responders. And there's not a day that I go by that I don't think of those 8 that gave their life for my life. And Memorial Day weekend, it was all about those 8 individuals. I mean, they died for me. And that's what Memorial Day is to basically salute those that have died in service. They died trying to regain my freedom. And I've got 3 wonderful children, Jodi and Tom, and those individuals would never have a chance to go fishing with their son as I have, walk their daughter down the aisle as I have, hold your grandkids. They would never have that chance. I have. And so every day I wake up, I earn it in memory of those 8 individuals. And that's where Folds of Honor, I retired from Anheuser-Busch, came to Folds, where it's a therapeutic piece for me to continue to educate people that freedom is not free. I mean, this story right here, you tell people the story, it's like, wow. I mean, it's hard to understand. Billy understands. And that's why Billy and I, when we talk, it's like Billy and I understand. We remember the smells. We remember the sounds. It's easy to tell the story, but You just hope that people do understand that freedom is not free. And these military and first responders, when they leave, you just don't know if they're going to be coming home. And the families are there. And we must never forget these families. And at Folds of Honor, we talk about honor their sacrifice, educate their legacy. And 52,000 scholarships that Lieutenant Colonel Rooney and the team we have put together. It's, gosh, every dollar that comes in, 91% goes into that scholarship. 45% of our recipients are minority. And out of that 45%, 57% are female. And so it's an honor. And like I said, those individuals would never have that chance. And so shame on me for not getting up every day and remembering them. I don't do 600 sit-ups, I can tell you that.
Or 300 push-ups, right?
I still do sit-ups, just not 600. And my shoulders are somewhat wearing out on me also. But it's one of the stories that's why I do this, is to tell the story of those 8, along with the others that had the guts to try.
I'm struck by the vividness of your memories and the specificity of your memories. And it's clear
we're talking
that,
50 years later. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I
Almost.
can't remember yesterday.
Yeah.
So, but I'm struck by that. And it is clear to me that has fueled your life's journey since then. But it seems you have found just a completely perfect match with Folds of Honor and their mission and the alignment between the story that you lived and you've been wonderful enough to share with us today and what they try to do every day for our families of the fallen.
Jodi, what's really interesting is 2007, I'm the director of military sales at Anheuser-Busch. And all of a sudden, security at Anheuser-Busch here in St. Louis calls and says, "Hey, Rocky, there's this guy in the lobby. It's in a flight uniform, wants to talk to somebody about a military program." I go downstairs, and sure enough, here's this little thin little pilot guy. And I go up to him, he goes, "Hello, Mr. Sickmann. My name is Major Rooney." He was a major then. And now, I mean, he and his wife put together this organization. He was flying from Chicago to Grand Rapids. The plane lands in Grand Rapids, and the pilot asked everybody to remain on board because he was bringing home the remains of a fallen soldier. This is Lieutenant Colonel Rooney's an F-16 fighter pilot. He's had 3 tours of duty over in the war on terrorism. And here he is flying home, and he hears this pilot and he sees the casket being draped with a flag being pulled off, and a little boy on the tarmac that would, again, never have the chance to go fishing, baseball with his dad, and the poor wife. And all of a sudden, Major Rooney's wiping his tears away, and the pilot says, "Thank you." Major Rooney gets up and looks around and realizes that over 3/4 of the plane got off the plane, nowhere to go than the warm blanket that this man just gave for his country. And that came home, Major Rooney, and told his wife, he goes, "People don't get it, that freedom is not free." And so it was synchronicity that I get to meet him. And he already had the drive, he had the passion. And, being with Anheuser-Busch, it's 14 years now, 28 million that we have raised on behalf of Folds of Honor. And so I retired, but that's why I'm the senior VP of Bud Accounts. So I still get to work with AB. It's now 42 years I'm working with AB, but our wholesalers all around and the consumers that drink that. We have a commemorative can out right now with Budweiser with Folds of Honor. So when you buy Budweiser, there's a little QR code. You can make a donation there, but you're going to make a donation if you're going to buy beer. And so at that point in time, that's when I met him. But he is just a dynamic individual and had this drive, and we have taken it to 52,000 scholarships. Just incredible.
He's covered a lot of ground today too. And you think, here's another movie reference, right? And I think this was one in your vignettes that when you had done it with another news outlet was about what Tom Hanks said in the movie Saving Private Ryan, right? Earn it.
Yes, earn it. Absolutely. And
He said that a few minutes ago. Yeah.
it is something I do. And that movie, Tom, Argo, again, another synchronicity. My wife and I are at a wedding in Columbus, Ohio. And the father of the bride goes, "Hey, Rocky, I know your son, Spencer's 6 years old." No, ever since he was 6, he wanted to be an actor. He's now in college. And he goes, "I want you to meet my sister. She's a casting director out in LA. Never know, someday she might be able to help him." I said, "Yeah." So I meet her. Her name's Debbie Zane, a wonderful lady. And so I gave her my card and said, Debbie, if anything ever pops up, please let me know. I'd love to try it. My son's really been driven to be an actor. And so 3 days later, 3 days later, you guys, she's back out in LA, emailing her girlfriend, asking her, hey, what are you working on? Girl comes back and says, well, I'm working with George and Ben Affleck and John Goodman and the cast of others about this movie, around hostage movie. And Debbie goes, well, I was just with one of the hostages this past weekend in the wedding. She goes, really, who was that? And she goes, Rocky Sickmann. They're typing. And she goes, Rocky Sickmann, he was one of the Marines, right? And she goes, yeah. She goes, his character's in the movie. I had no idea there was a movie being created and that they had a guy, but the guy that played me, much better looking guy than I, made me look good. And so she takes it upon herself, Debbie does, and says, hey, what's the chance of Ben meeting Rocky? He was there for 444 days. The other house guests, my other colleagues, they were there for 87 days, which is one day having your freedom stripped.
It's one day too many. Yeah.
You did. And so sure enough, the girl on the other side, she gets in contact with Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck says, yeah, I'd love to meet Rocky. Bring him out and bring his son. We'll put him in the movie. You guys, like that does not happen all the time. And so all of a sudden, I call my son. He's in Akron, Ohio. I said, get to the airport. I'll meet you at LAX tomorrow morning. So sure enough, the next day, 6 days later, we're on the set of Argo. And we walk into the set, which is eerie because it's like 1979 and there's videos playing. And Spencer's got this 1979 suit and he's much taller than I, a much better looking guy than I. And all of a sudden, Ben Affleck comes running over and he hugs me and goes, Rocky, it's an honor to meet you. I said, Ben, honor to meet you. And he goes, as you can see, I've got everybody set. We're ready to shoot this next piece. Now, Spencer, you're going to be a mail delivery guy. And so Spencer in the movie is a mail delivery guy pushing a cart, delivering mail back in those days where you go to one table, you drop off his mail and go to the next and drop her mail. And so they said, Rocky, you go in the back. Chris Terrio, he wrote the script of Argo. So he goes, Chris is going to take care of you. So I go in the back of the set and I sit in the director's chair, which that's Ben's chair. And I'm sitting there and all of a sudden they come in and they focus in on Spencer. And you guys, you have children. I had tears running down my eye because the only thing my son wanted to do was be an actor. And here he is in a movie, an Academy Award winning movie about his dad. So it's just one of those things that we could be here telling so many stories, but Ben invited my wife and I, Spencer and my daughter out to the red carpet premiere. He then invited me to the Canadian Embassy where they were going to show the movie the next week at the Canadian Embassy. And like I said, there's so many stories, but I used to play a lot of tennis before I was taken hostage. And I get to Iran and I found out there was a clay court right behind the ambassador's house. So every day when I was finished working out, I'd go back there and I'd be playing tennis. And the ambassador, Bruce Langdon, chargé d'affaires, he one day on duty, he says, hey, Rocky, I noticed you're a pretty good tennis player. Would you mind being my partner? I said, sure, I'd be honored. Who do we have to play? He goes, we have to play the Canadian ambassador and his assistant.
You're supposed to tank that. You're not supposed to win.
No pressure.
The week before we're taken hostage, we smoked Ken Taylor and his assistant. The next week, he rescues our people. I get to see him at the movie Argo screening at the Canadian Embassy. And I go up to him and say, sir, Rocky Sickmann. He goes, Rocky, I know who you are. How's your tennis game doing? He'd never forgotten how we had smoked him. But anyway, my son, that was his biggest movie that he got. He now recently got married and little baby on the way. So, but yeah, trials and tribulations, the people that you meet each and every day, just like you guys. And I salute you for what you're doing and providing the understanding. There's probably many military families out there that do not know if they qualify for a scholarship. So they can easily go to foldsofhonor.org and basically you can click on that donate tab for those that want to make a donation. Click on that donate tab and you can become a squadron leader. And a squadron leader is where you donate $13 to Folds of Honor. And why 13? There's 13 folds to a fly. And that's why we must never forget those that sacrifice that freedom for us. And it's something that's near and dear to my heart.
So I grew up and I played tennis. I played tennis at a school just outside of Columbus, Ohio, Denison University. So my brother and I used to play doubles together at the school. But the real question is, was it red clay or green clay?
No, it was red.
Red.
Yeah. And they would rake it every morning, Tom.
Yeah. You're watching the French Open now, right?
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a favorite?
I'm not watching it. I'm not as heavily involved. I can tell you I had an injury when I was over in Iran, and I had a bone mishap. And this is, it's a story. Billy Gallegos loves to tell this story. And again, time-wise, you guys, I don't know how much time you got, but like I said, we could be here all day. But Billy and I are doing all these exercises, and all of a sudden one day, they come into the room, and they said, "We want to arm wrestle you." And Billy and I are like looking at these little things and like, are you kidding me? And Jerry is 55, we're 22. He's the elder. And he's sitting there saying, "Hey, you guys watch it. They're setting you up for something." No, Jerry, we got these guys. So we had a table, had 2 chairs. They come in, we arm wrestle them, and we beat them, which we knew we would. We're doing sit-ups up on top of the table, 1 arm, 2 arms. And all of a sudden, they start to walk out. They said, "Now we want to wrestle you." And Jodi and I look at each other. We got, "You gotta be kidding me." It's like,
did they not learn?
I had like a 6-pack in my stomach from just lean and mean. And Billy, they closed the door. I said, "Billy, I've never wrestled high school. Hand-to-hand combat in the Marine Corps, but I've never wrestled." He goes, "That's all right. I wrestled. You just wear them out and I'll put the final hold." I said, "Well, that sounds like a plan." And Jerry, of course, is saying, "You guys just be careful. They're going to freaking put us in prison." No, Jerry, just you sit over there. And here I am. I'm looking at Jerry and Billy, and we slept on 3-inch foam mats. And that's what we slept on for 400 days. And so that mat, we put those mats on. That was our mat to wrestle. So I still have my shirt on. I'm talking to Billy and Jerry, and all of a sudden the door opens behind me. I don't hear it. And Billy and Jerry go, "Holy cow, Rocky." And I turn around. Well, it's 1980, and they boycott the Olympics. They brought in one of the Olympic wrestlers into the room. And Jerry goes, "See, I told you they were setting you guys up." And I'm thinking, holy cow, Billy. This guy had arms the size of my thighs. And he was like, "Billy, this guy's going to eat my clock." He goes, "No, you can do it." I said, "Do what?"
You can do it.
Succumb. Yeah.
But again, at this point in time, you guys, you had all this like energy and frustration built up. And I'm on the mat and I start taking my shirt off. And Billy goes, "Rocky, watch out." He charges me. So I rip my shirt off and I take this guy, and it's a very close room. And so instead of going against him, I went with him. I picked him up. I took him and I threw him up against the concrete wall onto his shoulder, take the same shoulder, and I throw him down onto the concrete floor. But as I did, I stiffed armed the concrete floor, which I knew I'd hurt it, but I didn't know how bad. And anyway, this guy, you heard a crack. And this guy is sitting there in agony. And so here, Billy and I, we get up, we high five, and Jerry goes, "Oh." Yeah. And you look at the guards, and they're just like, they can't believe it. And they drug this guy out of the room. Well, they come to find out, everybody, hostages found out that I had wrestled one of the Iranians. And then the guys that were on a rescue operation, they found out I wrestled one of the Iranians. And so they presented me a gold medal for 1980 Tehran hostage Olympics.
Do you still have it? Do you still have it?
Still have it.
Yeah, I still do. Yeah, it's in the safe. They gave me these 2 medals, but that bone, eventually it disformed, and they had to go in, take the bone out, and put 3 screws in. So that was my tennis hand. So I haven't really gone out, Tom, to play much since then. So
wasn't 1980 the same year of Miracle on Ice too? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
You can tie your story in with that.
I'm telling you, 1 degree separation to every movie on the planet.
And there's so many stories, you guys. And all of you, both of you have children, right? I want you to sit back and imagine you being my parents. And all of a sudden they knock on the door and say, hey, your son or daughter has just been taken hostage. How do you wake up every morning, get cleaned up, and go to work and have a clean head to focus on your work? I mean, that's what my poor mother and father had to do for 444 days. My mother was working a chicken dinner at St. Gertrude's Parish the morning that she found out I was taken hostage. And she put up the Christmas tree that December, and she kept up the Christmas tree until I came home in 1981. Whenever it would die, she'd send my dad out to get another tree. I mean, she was just a very religious girl that knew that she's not going to give up. And media lived in their yard for 444 days. I mean, Ted Koppel, Nightline, all these things we had no idea until coming home. It just took a toll on my poor parents. So it's just not a story of me. It's a story about my family. It's a story about those guys that had the guts to try, and especially those 8 that did that.
Yeah. What would you tell a young person today who was considering getting into a life of military?
You know what? If they were anything like me, not knowing what I wanted to do, I wanted to go to school, play football, but I was a little mean machine. But academically, I did not have my head put on straight. And it wasn't until I came out of the military that I incredibly well in school. But you know what? If you're unsure of what you want to do and you want to serve your country and see the world, I mean, the military is not a bad opportunity. There's so many individuals that are out there that just are unsure. And it really, not to say that I needed guidance, but it definitely are things that my wife and I were watching a movie the other day, and she goes, that's why the military was so good for me, because it was regimented. I was doing the same thing and got me to build some self-esteem. And after being held hostage and coming home, it's like, you guys, if I have to make a speech, and believe it or not, when I was in high school, I had to have my buddy do my speech for me because I was too shy to get in front of a group of people. And the first time I came home, I can remember having to do a speech in front of 1,000 people. And the worst thing that happened, well, one of the worst things was when they put us up against a wall in a mock firing squad with 3 rifles to the back of our head. And I mean, that was an incredible, took the wind out of the sail. And every time I have to do something now that I think is really tough, I think about my worst time, knowing that if I'm able to do that, I can do anything. Loss of a loved one, as my poor parents, that was difficult. But everything else, if you just put your mind, your heart, and your soul to it, you can do it.
I get this visual too of you coming home off that plane, right, and seeing all those, what was it, Valley material trucks waiting for you?
Yes, yeah, God love you. Yeah, they're sitting right there. Well, number one, also, you guys have seen the movie Argo, Castaway with Tom Hanks.
Yes, yeah. You're a big Tom Hanks fan now, right? Because we've referenced 2 movies so far with him, right?
I mean, but he had a locket. And when I was held hostage, those first 30 days, I had a picture of Jill's picture in my head. And she was one that really helped me get through that. And I said, I'm not going to let these people get the best of me. And if I ever get home, I'm going to marry that girl. And so sure enough, came home, made my first phone call home. And my dad said, Rocky, Jill's here. I said, she there? She wants to talk to you. I'm thinking, well, that doesn't sound good. Is she going to get married, or is she married? I mean, it's been 2 Christmases, and she was 18, beautiful girl. And so she goes, Rocky, you got to make a decision, either me or the military. And I chose wisely. And so, like I said before, you guys, without her, I would be in a ditch somewhere. I mean, she knew me before, and she knows me now. And so she keeps me on track of making sure I'm doing the right things. And sometimes I don't always say the right things, but it's one of those things that without her, I would not be where I'm at. I'd still be wearing green.
Inspirational.
Yeah, you've got a big, healthy dose of perspective that a lot of folks don't have. And yeah.
I'm spent. So you have to stop talking, Rocky. Yeah.
You've met your match, Tom.
You got the Clydesdale thing coming up, right? Later this year with
yes, sir.
With Folds.
Yeah. Well, obviously the world's famous Clydes, we've got, Anheuser-Busch, 14 years, $28 million. This year, Folds of Honor is going to be following the Clydesdales, or the Clydesdales are following the Folds of Honor. So I'm going to an air show in Terre Haute, Indiana this weekend. And then from there to Nashville, where we have the Clydesdales for a celebrity softball tournament. And so, but yeah, the Clydesdales bring a lot of people out. And with that, we are able to help merchandise Folds of Honor of who we are and what we do. Again, not only for the military, but also the first responders. So it's a great piece. Yeah. Just like I said, they have the can, but now also the Clydesdales. And of course, Zach Bryan, he's doing some Bud Light this year for the Folds of Honor. He's a big Navy military guy, and so he gets it. And it's just these are opportunities that we couldn't afford to have. And it's wonderful to have a long-standing partner like Anheuser-Busch. And again, like I said, 42 years I've been, and I work with all the wholesalers and the brand teams around the country to continue to bring awareness to who Folds of Honor is.
Hey, Rocky, big plug to Anheuser. Best Super Bowl commercials ever with the Clydesdales, right?
They have been. I mean, they bring tears to my eyes.
They do. Me too. Just thought about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, they're impressive in person. I got to go to the farm there in St. Louis one time when I was younger, we'll say.
Rocky, tell me, besides Zach Bryan, any other celebrities that I would be interested in seeing at this celebrity softball event?
In Nashville, I do not know. I know we have a chapter. Like right now, we have over 37 Folds of Honor chapters. 8 years ago, we had none. Now we have chapters that are forming. I mean, just the enrollment of scholarships, I think we had a 60% increase, over 60% increase for 2023, 2024 number of people. So with that said, obviously funding. When Major Rooney first started this in 2007, he had more money than he had recipients. Well, now we have more recipients than we had money. So it's asking your listeners to go out to foldsofhonor.org and make their donation. But there's going to be a lot of celebrities in Nashville, but I can't tell you who they all are right now.
I'll be sending an email to Glenn every single day, waiting for the list of celebrities.
Yeah, peeking over the outfield fence, trying to get in.
Right.
Yes, that will be you. I'm confident of it. Well, I want to go ahead and close out. We do something at the end of all of our podcasts that we rather enjoy, so hopefully it's not too terribly painful, but it's called the Military Minute. Last week, we had a guest on that spoke about fly fishing and using that to help veterans bond with each other and overcome certain experiences. So our question for the Military Minute last week...
Do you think Rocky will know the answer to this?
He might, and you're totally welcome to answer if you do. I would never, ever know the answer to this.
I have to look at the answer to find out what the answer is.
About my fear of fish. What was the nickname for a fly fisherman, and where was the birthplace of fly fishing? Do you know before we say?
First place, Wyoming.
I don't know if that's where that is.
I don't know if that is. I have to get up my map. I'll have to Google that answer.
From Montana, I mean, just beautiful rivers cascading. And what was the other question?
What is the nickname for a fly fisherman? It's okay. I would never.
I'm looking at
flyer.
That would be. We could call them that too. So the answer that we were looking for in the Military Minute. If you're in an audience and you answered that the fly fisherman nickname was a trout bum, and the birthplace of fly fishing is the Catskills, which we're Googling right now to figure out which state, in fact, the Catskills are in. Our handy producer says New York.
That's
which seems very odd.
I'm gonna fact check.
I think we need to fact check you, but that's the answer that Tom was looking for in the Military Minute. So if you answered that and you see your name posted as the lucky recipient of the Military Minute prize, you can find your way to $50 for you and $50 to a charity of your choice. And that will be the same for this week's Military Minute. So this week's Military Minute, so you can't answer this one, Rocky, because this is going to be teed up when we drop this podcast. But it takes us back to 1979. Which movie won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1979? So you can think the answer, but don't say it out loud.
Yes, Rocky.
I'd have
Inside
to Google
voice. It. Don't answer that out loud.
I'd have to Google it. So if you know the answer or Google is your friend, when this podcast drops, make sure you comment that and watch to see if you, one, you are correct, and two, if you are drawn as the lucky recipient, again, of $50 for you and $50 for a charity of your choice. And a great place to use that money would be foldsofhonor.org, which is sort of the epicenter for learning more, volunteering, and donating about this great organization.
Did you know, Rocky, that the number one song back in 1979 was My Sharona by the Knack?
Oh, I'm going to have that earworm all day.
And the real story behind that was about he was in love with Sharona, and he wrote a song about her. Reminds me of Rocky and Jill.
Yeah.
You could have written a song about Jill.
You still could.
Maybe you did write a song about Jill.
No, did not write a song. It's interesting. And like I said, we could be here all day, but I met Cher when I came home in Vegas. And
No.
You just made Tom choke on his water. He's so excited.
Yeah,
about that.
send me her contact information too.
What's really interesting about Cher, it was after it, and my mother and father were with us, my wife or my girlfriend and myself, and my attorney and his wife. And it was a show at the Dunes. And I think it was Dunes. And so afterwards they said, Mr. Sickmann, Cher would like to meet you. So I'm like thinking, I'm meeting Cher. And so I go up and she is on the stage in a bubble, like a windstream, motorhome. And all of a sudden they knock on the door and the door opens and she jumps out and hugs me. And I'm like, holy cow, Cher is hugging me. And the interesting thing with Cher, at that point in time, I didn't know who was to my right. And my girlfriend had to say, Rocky, that's your mom. I said, yeah, Cher, this is my mom and my dad. And so she takes us into this area and she sits me down. She says, now, Rocky, I want you to think about what you've gone through just now. Do you want to live the life of a normal person? If you do, you want to filter back in. If you want to live a life of a popular person, this is the life that you have to live. And it's not good. I mean, of all people, Cher.
Life advice from Cher.
Yeah. And it was my wife and I still think about what she said that night. And it's like, she was so down to earth, a wonderful lady.
What year was that? What year?
1981, like February.
So Sonny was still around.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
We really could be here.
But yeah, we'll have to get together someday, Tom and Jodi. And again, like I said, I can't thank you guys enough for what you're doing to help the military families filter into the civilian population and those that are still in to help them with what you're doing. I salute you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed today's episode, go out to afbank.com and subscribe to the show. Also, make sure to rate us, leave us a comment on your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. The Folds of Honor one we did with Nick Nichols not too long ago was recently published out there too. So we're really looking forward to sharing this with our audience for those that want to listen down the road and in perpetuity to be able to have access to the story that you shared with us. And we are honored again to have you on the show and applaud you for what you're doing today and what you went through. And you're a true patriot and a great person. So I appreciate the time you spent with us today.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for allowing me to tell the story of those 8 individuals. Freedom's not free. We must always remember that.
Oh, it was our great pleasure to meet you today.
Yours also. And Jodi, please tell your husband thank you for serving.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, guys.
All
right.
Bye.
Bye.
Copyright Armed Forces Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. All non-Armed Forces Bank-owned apps, websites, company names, and product names are trademarks or registered trademarks of their respective owners. Their mention does not imply any affiliation with or endorsement by Armed Forces Bank of them or their products and services. They are merely used as examples of the many available apps, companies, and websites that offer similar services. Before using any app or website, you should carefully review the terms of use, data collection, and privacy policy. Apps may have an initial cost or in-application purchase features. This information is general in nature and is not intended to be legal, tax, or financial advice. Although Armed Forces Bank believes this information to be accurate, it cannot ensure that it could change. Statements or opinions of individuals referenced herein are their own, not Armed Forces Bank. Consult an appropriate professional concerning your specific situation and respective governing bodies for applicable laws, such as IRS.gov for current tax law. Armed Forces Bank, the Armed Forces Bank logo, and the Militarily Speaking logo are registered trademarks of Armed Forces Bank.